And now, here's your host, Christian apologist, Bob Siegel.
And this is Bob Siegel. So, you'd like to believe in God, but you're troubled that so many evangelical Christians who claim to embrace the love of Jesus Christ could accept a hateful, fascist, xenophobic president such as Donald Trump. In fact, how could anyone with an ounce of decency just sit back and watch children being literally ripped away from their own families? Does God believe in seeing families separated? No, my friend, God does not like seeing families separated, but God does want people to know the actual facts about a situation. Fact. The separation of children from families of illegal immigrants has been going on for a very long time. Putting aside the fact that Trump just discontinued this practice with an executive order, let's back up and take a more accurate look at what had been going on. Trump was enforcing a law that he himself did not actually make. Under the Obama administration, when the exact same separation was taking place, we witnessed no such bombastic outcry from the mainstream media or the Democrat politicians. And we barely even heard much when the Trump administration first continued this policy. By an amazing, incredible coincidence, the recent emphasis on the separation of children was timed with the release of the IG report on the FBI, which we scarcely heard a word about in the news. Go figure. A few other facts. Some pictures taken of kids in cages are not recent and were taken from the time of, once again, the Obama administration. If the journalists showing such pictures knew, they are contemptible liars. If they didn't know, they are sloppy, irresponsible journalists. Want a few more facts? Okay, here's a few more. Families crossing our border at a legal point of entry seeking asylum were not separated, but people try to make it sound like those are the only ones that are being separated. Only the families crossing illegally were separated. As for the others, kids of arrested parents are always separated. The alternative is to put them in jail with their parents. Where is the outcry when American families are separate? Oh, but Bob, that's different. They're breaking the law. So are people who come into our country illegally. They are breaking the law. It may not be politically correct to call it what it is, but that is what it is. That is just exactly what it is. And not every child was being separated from their parents anyway. Many were being separated from unrelated adults who merely wanted a child as a shield to get in because they knew that the optics of separation would look bad. And many of these children crossing were unaccompanied by any adult at all. Many were not even children, but teens. Many of these teens are gang members. Some of these teens are females whose parents gave them birth control pills ahead of time. You know why? Because they knew full well that the coyotes and cartel members smuggling them across the border would rape them. Do you think I sound outrageous right now to say these things? Well, it is outrageous. Unfortunately, something can be outrageous but also be true. However, I now want to talk about a few outrageous statements that are not true. The many comparisons of these child housing shelters with the Holocaust. Let me be as clear as I possibly can. Anybody who compares this with the Holocaust is a complete moron, totally ignorant of history. Now, okay, if history isn't your subject, fine. We all excel at different things. I don't expect everyone to know history. I do expect any so-called journalist giving an editorial on TV to know history. Take it from somebody who is in fact Jewish and knows a lot about the Holocaust. The Nazis did not separate Jewish families eager to migrate to Germany. They rounded up Jewish German citizens who already lived in Germany and Jewish citizens of other European countries that they had just conquered. Men, women, children, babies. They confiscated all of their possessions, shaved their heads, stripped them naked, and exterminated most of them, some by firing squad, some by gas chambers. In some cases, babies, live babies, were thrown alive into ovens. It was a systematic plot to annihilate the entire race. And these pea-brains on MSNBC and CNN have the unmitigated gall to compare the Nazis to Donald Trump. Look, maybe you don't like Trump. Maybe you can't stand Trump. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion, but when you compare his actions to the Holocaust, when you say that anyone who voted for him is as bad as the Nazis, you disrespect the victims of the real Holocaust. Now, this has been going on for years, and not merely by comparisons about the border. A long time ago, PETA put up a picture of Auschwitz concentration camp next to a plate of fried chicken and called it the new Holocaust. So not only is Trump as bad as Hitler, anybody who eats meat is also as bad as Hitler. I'll tell you who he's like Hitler. Ladies and gentlemen, there are still genuine Nazis in the world, and a lot of people who don't call themselves Nazis but have Nazi-type ideologies, but they are camouflaged by this utter nonsense, these idiotic comparisons. If everybody is a Nazi, nobody is a Nazi. And yet, if we wanted a bona fide comparison, at least a comparison of the Nazis early on, let me remind you that the real honest-to-goodness Nazis, long before they exterminated Jews, exterminated mentally and physically challenged people. They were into eugenics. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, had Hitler's eugenicists write for her magazine. We are going down a similar road today with practices such as partial birth abortion, yet many who shed tears for children at the border who are being housed and cared for do not seem to care about the extermination of a third trimester baby capable of living outside the womb, or a baby born with Down syndrome whose bed is marked in an American hospital with a sign saying, "Do not feed." Despite these glaring inconsistencies, people still feel vindicated by screaming about Trump on the basis that he's a racist. And in being a racist, that makes him, in their minds, at least an embryonic version of Hitler, which leads to our next fact. Most of the Democrats and mainstream media do not honestly think Trump is a racist. I'm sorry, they don't. And when they claim they do, they are lying through their teeth. It's bumpkin for the masses, something they hope the suckers will believe. They themselves know otherwise. For one thing, the man has been a businessman and television celebrity for years. There has been no evidence of racial preferences in his hiring policies or the people he's worked with on TV or in the participants of the Miss Universe pageant. Not only that, but these public figures who now call him a racist palled around with Trump for years. How do I explain that if he's a racist? Hillary invited him to her wedding. He was friends with Jesse Jackson. He was friends with Charles Schumer. Their understanding of Trump as a racist was a revelation they received when he expressed interest in running as a Republican. And what about the many African Americans and Latinos who vocally support Trump? People such as Ben Carson, Diamond and Silk, Alveda King, who was a guest on our show just a month ago, Kanye West, Candace Owens, Kimberly Guilfoyle, and many, many, many Border Patrol agents are Hispanic themselves and very enthusiastic about the support they receive from Donald Trump. They do not believe he is a racist. Neither do they believe he is anti-immigrant. The man is married to an immigrant, for Pete's sakes. The Democrats know that. The media knows that. As for him being specifically against Hispanic immigrants and making racist comments about them, he made no such comment. Let me say that again. He made no such comment. He did not call them animals. He called the gang members of MS-13 animals. He did not say all Hispanic immigrants were rapists. He said some of them were. And he said that because some of them are. He made it clear that he was not talking about everybody. He spoke highly of legal Hispanic immigrants, many of whom themselves are against illegal immigration, who think people should wait in line and enter the right way, as they did. And how about the Charlottesville protests, when Trump claimed there were good and bad people on both sides? That's been distorted as well. He was not saying that any of the KKK were good. He was saying that not everybody who protested the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee was a racist or KKK member. Some were merely protesting the removal of a historical monument. That was the context, if anybody cares about context anymore. As for there being some bad people on the other side, on the left side, well, some on the other side were from Antifa. So yeah, pretty bad. That's a violent organization. They're the ones that used vandalism to shut down free speech in places such as Berkeley. They call themselves anti-fascist, hoping people will be too stupid to notice their own fascist tactics and say to themselves, well, gee, this can't be fascism if they say they're against Fascists? Their very title proves that they aren't fascists. Anyway, whatever you may think about children being separated from their families, once again, Trump just signed an executive order which discontinued it anyway. Did the Democrats give him any credit? I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. Don't worry. There's always a new criticism of Donald Trump to pull out of the bag. Now people complain about kids being incarcerated with their parents. Yes, that was the original problem. A problem liberals did not want to acknowledge until the situation was reversed. So let's see. We can't separate the kids. We can't incarcerate parents and kids together. The only thing that's left is catch and release, because that's what Democrats really want. Catch and release, which means they really want open borders. Make no mistake, between now and November, the Democrats will do nothing about this situation. They will obstruct every Republican bill that tries to fix it, because if the Republicans do fix this, it will look bad to the Democrats. Trump already offered to legalize the so-called dreamers in exchange for a wall. No can do. Trump could offer this again. He could do a lot of things. He could alienate his base who put him in power, and he won't get as much as a handkerchief from the Democrats. He could grant amnesty to every illegal immigrant, assign each family a private deluxe 3-bedroom condo, award them each with a gold medal, buy them a year's pass to Disneyland, hand them a lifetime supply of Slurpees from 7-Eleven, and the Democrats will still campaign about how he hates immigrants. This is Bob Siegel, making the obvious obvious. Welcome back to 1170 The Answer. I'm your host, Bob Siegel. Joining us today, National Review contributor and frequent contributor to the Bob Siegel Show, Mike Fredenburg.
Well, Bob, thank you for having me. Great opening monologue. Very frustrating to hear all the fake news out there. Lies of commission and lies of omission.
Absolutely.
And when you don't give the background to the whole subject, and it's very convenient about what they leave out about the whole debate.
And there's
what's really
so much more background even than what I gave, but I tried to at least give a skeletal context.
Listen, here's something, just sort of a macro view. If you take a look what our president has on his desk, North Korea, we kicked the can down the road on North Korea's nuclear program for over 40 years. It landed on President Trump's desk. Trade, which we're going to be talking about in more detail, we kicked the can down the road on that since the mid-1990s to land on Donald Trump's desk right now. Then you look at the immigration issue. The can has been kicked down the road so that everything right now, we have 3 huge issues that he's having to deal with right now on his desk. And any one of them would be enough for one president to try to take on. But right now we have, hate to say it, our poor president has 3 really huge issues.
And the thing is, I mentioned Obama, but this was going on in the Bush administration too. And another one of the people that spoke out against the separation was Laura Bush. I wonder why she never whispered anything into her husband's ear when he was doing the exact same thing. The hypocrisy, even from the Republicans, is just thick as pea soup.
Well, the thing is they actually believed in very relaxed border control. The Bush family has not been a big, strong, controlling immigration type family.
But when they occasionally did it, they did separate some families.
Oh yeah, of course they did. They did. Of course, that did happen during the time. But
and Obama was a mixed bag because he deported a lot of people, but then he relaxed a lot of things and did the catch and the release. It's almost hard to understand the paradox of Obama's policy.
Let's remember that there was almost a 2-year period where Obama had 59 to 60 senators and very strong majorities in the House of Representatives.
And they didn't do anything about it.
And they didn't do anything about it. Now, ask yourself, why didn't he do anything about it? The reason he didn't do anything about it is because he understood that doing something about it, that relaxing the borders even more than he had done, would have hurt the chances of holding on to his majorities. He understood that. He understood that better than apparently some Republicans understand the politics of this. Right now, it's winning politics. Every poll shows, with the possible exception of the wall, and we'll talk about it in a second, but every poll shows that there is major support from the American public, from independents, from Republicans, and quite a few Democrats for ending chain migration, for tightening up the borders, for getting rid of the lottery system. I mean,
Well,
and
there's
yet,
a lot for the wall, too, actually, even though I know a lot of people like to. But you know what gets me, Mike, is the Republicans and Democrats have both been culpable in this. The Democrats want free illegal immigrants in our country because they want them to be able to vote. They're the same ones passing laws that you don't need a driver's license, or in some states, just giving you a driver's license if you're knowing you're illegal. The Republicans and their big business, they want the cheap labor. And so it's a very unholy alliance. So when Donald Trump went in there and talked about draining a swamp, it's really a two-sided swamp on both sides of the aisle.
And if you wanted to label it, you could label it as the elites.
Yeah.
From both sides of the party. And it definitely is an issue that does cut across. It's bipartisan. We have people that have been bad players in both parties. So what I wanted to talk a little bit more in detail about is trade. And I have to tell you that when Donald Trump first threw his hat in the ring, I knew, of course, who he was. And I knew there was a show called The Apprentice, but I had never seen an entire Apprentice go through. I probably flipped through the stage and said, oh, yeah, that's The Apprentice. But so when he threw his hat in the ring, I was probably like most people going, well, okay, this is kind of a spectacle. It's kind of interesting.
I couldn't stand him. I thought he was a loudmouth buffoon, but boy, he really is doing a good job.
Here's the thing that happened for me that probably allowed me to be a little bit more open-minded right from the outset, because in the first debate, I think they had 17 candidates on the stage. One candidate mentioned the trade issue as a problem. Only one did, and that was Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And that's been one of my pet issues for a long time. I believe that the Republican Party has sold out, sadly, has sold out the working class in this country horribly, such that, you have people that are generally pretty conservative, blue collar workers that are patriotic, love their country, believe in a strong defense, are pro-life, believe in the Second Amendment, they're hunters. And yet for a long period of time, they felt that if they had to vote Republican, they would be stabbing themselves in the back economically because we sold them out. And the biggest loss of our manufactured jobs took place under George W. Bush. That's when we had our manufacturing absolutely gutted.
Well, and the idea of free trade sounds very consistent with capitalism, but my understanding is these agreements that America was getting into with other countries, we were paying these tariffs that they were not paying, or something very much like a tariff. There was at least a trade imbalance.
There is a massive trade imbalance. I believe it's cumulatively over $11 trillion now since the 1980s. With China alone, I believe since 2000s, it's $4.6 trillion. And you're right. It has not been about free trade. First of all, let's ask ourselves, are the people that control China, the Chinese communists, are they really, truly free trade, free market people? Communists, are they really true free trade, free market people? No, they're not. They run a centrally planned economy. They do have a little bit of flexibility, but it's largely centrally planned. So what we have managed to do is we've managed to prop up a communist government by subsidizing their government with trillions and trillions of dollars in cash, and then trillions of dollars of intellectual property. And so we've seen this massive growth in the Chinese economy, a centrally planned communist government, communist state that has made the so-called free market economies look anemic in comparison. And that hasn't been done on their own merits. It's been done because we've had a very bad, inane trade policy.
Absolutely.
So in the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan came into office. And one of the things people may not realize, he comes from a very blue-collar background, truly a blue-collar background. He grew up in a middle-class, blue-collar home, dad an alcoholic.
Well, and he was a Democrat for many years.
And he was a Democrat
Ronald
for many
Reagan,
years.
Yeah.
And when he ran for office in 1979, 1980, he received the Teamsters Union endorsement. That's kind of amazing, a union endorsement.
Now, I'm trying to remember, did he do anything about tariffs and trade, though? Or
Let's go back on
he
that premise? Absolutely did. He came in there and he said, at the time, the major player and the major trade deficits were being generated by Japan. And he went after Japan big time, threatening them with tariffs. And they, because of some of the stuff he had done, with getting rid of the air traffic controllers, he was viewed as a very tough guy that you did not want to mess with. So he got China was manipulating not China, but Japan was manipulating its currency. So President Reagan put steep tariffs in place. Harley Davidson, for example, was about ready to go under. Trump put in, I believe, close to 50 to 100% tariffs on Japanese motorcycles.
You know, that's interesting because the last big time in our economy that we can think of where it was really great really was Reagan, and he was doing things similar to Trump. Okay, we will be right back. Welcome back to the Bob Siegel Show. I'm here with National Review contributor Mike Fredenburg. Mike, before you continue on trade, there's a big elephant in the room also in the news, and that's just the way these demonstrations against the border policies have been going. One of the Trump cabinet members was shouted out of a restaurant. Sarah Sanders was quietly told by a manager that they just refused to give her service. I wanted to get your response to a little bit of that.
Yes, the hostility and the potential for violence, the way the left has escalated this is it really is kind of frightening. And before we talk the politics of it, just think about it. You're at your house, you have your kids there, and you have people just shouting, faces filled with hate and rage, sitting outside your home where you're there with your kids. You know, the Homeland Secretary, DHS Secretary's house. You had Sarah Huckabee Sanders out for a meal.
And she was very gracious the way she took it, but
yeah, she was very gracious. But she was, asked to leave the restaurant by the partisan restaurant owner. I'm sure that was a brilliant move on their part in terms of business. But regardless, so I will just say this: I think the pettiness, and right now, as we see, we hear about, oh my heavens, Trump's been promoting violence. Well, the fact is, 90+% of any of the violence committed in this country over the last couple of years has been committed by left-wing groups, period.
Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, don't let anybody get away with this trick. When conservatives complain about the way Sarah Sanders was treated, people like to conflate it with the wedding cake store where he wouldn't give the cake to the gay couple. And they say, so what's the difference? There was a big difference. He was not refusing them services. He was not refusing to serve them a cake. He was not refusing to serve them a wedding cake. He was refusing to artistically decorate it by saying things about gay marriage that he didn't believe in. This was an artistic issue. It would be analogous to the government telling a film producer or a novelist that they had to put obligatory gay characters in their work and have a pro message. Also, that comment that Peter Fonda put on Twitter,
several comments.
Just, oh my goodness. I didn't think anything could be worse than some of the things we've seen.
The hatred and the vileness of that comment, I will say this. I would prefer I would prefer that the opponents, the left and the right, could be respectful and not have these kind of comments. I mean, these are awful comments. There's nothing beneficial happening really with them, except that
it may help the conservatives win the election.
It's people in the middle, independents, that can look at those comments and go, what the heck? They look at that and they just think this is crazy. And then you have the two women, right? Two very prominent women in the Trump administration being attacked and harassed.
And where are the feminists supporting her?
Right. And I think that there's a lot of women that are going to sit there and think, gosh, if I was there with my kids, there's going to be a lot of empathy. So they just have lost their minds. And I call it Trump derangement syndrome. It's, it is a bipartisan phenomenon. More people on the left have it. But we had, some of the never-Trumpers that had horrible cases of it. They just couldn't see straight anymore.
Never-Trumpers being the ones in the Republican.
Yeah, the Republican. Well, we had never-Trumpers on their side, but the ones I was most annoyed with. It's
mostly associated with Republicans.
Yeah, you think of,
never-Trumper.
William Kristol, people like that, Glenn Beck.
And they pretty much remained never-Trumpers, too.
No, yes, and Corker. And Flake.
Corker's abominable.
And people like that.
And Paul Ryan gives lip service, but he seems to do everything he can to work against Trump.
Well, and Paul Ryan is a good segue back to the trade issue. Because when Donald Trump was running, I believed, and I still believe, that one of the issues that was sort of kept beneath the surface. Now, Donald Trump did campaign on the trade issue, but his opponents didn't really go after him on the trade issue. It was interesting. They did not want to take that issue on because public polling shows, first of all, Republicans overwhelmingly do not believe that trade is fair with China right now. They don't believe that the trade situation is fair. And it's interesting, there's far more support for protectionist measures, for measures to rectify the trade situation among Republicans who are supposed to be, quote unquote, more for free trade and free markets. That's because I think that Republicans in general are more educated on the issue and understand that free trade to some degree has been given a bum rap because what we have with China is nothing like free trade. You can't have free trade when you're the only one opening your markets. That's not free trade. In order to have free trade, they have to open up their markets.
Yeah, if it was fair, we would all be for free trade.
Right.
That's not, free trade has not really been free for us.
But ironically, we have the people that support the status quo on trade, and you can, the Wall Street Journal, the talking heads, many Republicans that like to talk about lofty economic principles and free to choose, Milton Friedman types and things like that. And they've all been defending the status quo on the basis that free trade's good, but it's not been free trade. So people that don't really understand economics hear the term free trade and they associate it with the system we have right now, which is not free trade. So free trade has ironically been maligned by the very people saying that they believe in it.
Yeah.
And so to get at the kind of stuff that China does, and the rest of the world also has taken advantage of us on trade. I have a tendency to focus on China because I consider them literally to be an enemy of the United States.
Well, that's the one that Trump primarily focuses on too.
Right. But, for example, Canada runs very large trade deficits with us annually.
Oh, yeah, that was really brave of the Canadian Prime Minister to make a comment about Trump after Trump had gone overseas.
Germany runs a large trade deficit with us. And here's something that's very interesting. The average German worker makes considerably more per hour annually than the average American worker. Yet Germany runs large trade surpluses every year. So that sort of takes away the idea that it's only because we have high wages that we have these trade deficits and that other countries can produce things more cheaply.
That's interesting. Okay, more trade, more politics, more tariffs when we return to the Bob Siegel Show. Free trade always sounds great, but when it isn't free for us, then it's not really free trade. Here to tell you more about it, Mike Fredenburg.
So going back to President Reagan's view on trade. President Reagan was a free market guy. He believed in the power of markets. He believed that individuals and businesses allocating capital could make the most efficient use of that capital and provide the greatest benefit to society. So that's pretty classic. But so why was Reagan then, if he believed in that, why did he put, for example, on some electronics goods from Japan, 100% tariffs? Because they were engaged in unfair trade practices. They were subsidizing their industries. So he basically used tariffs to push them back more toward a free trade way of doing things. But the other thing, too, is that in the history of economies, there have been times when protectionism has really made a lot of sense. Let's say you have a new industry that's coming up, let's say a textile industry in the history of the United States. At one point in time, we had a massive growth in textile industries. We put measures in place to protect our industry when they were small to compete with Europe and England and places like that. And once they got their footing under them, they got big enough to protect themselves, then we took down some of those trade barriers. So sometimes you need to put a barrier in place to protect a fledgling industry until it can get its feet underneath them. So there's times and places to use tariffs and protectionist measures. And the greatest periods of growth in the history of the world, whether it be England, whether it be South Korea, whether it be China or the United States, have been periods where there have been nationalist, protectionist policies in place. That is when the greatest growth in GDP has occurred in those areas, when the countries that practice mercantilism. Now, there could be times when it doesn't make sense to practice mercantilism, but the idea that tariffs always are going to be damaging to the economy is just false. The history does not bear that out. But then again, you can't obviously overuse tariffs. But this blind thing that's saying tariffs are always bad is just false. And that comes out of a blind ideology that is more akin to libertarianism than it is to conservatism. Because conservatives have a more realistic view of the market. We believe in the market, but we know that it's a human institution. Thus, it's never going to be perfect. It's not God. It can't always correct for everything. It won't always make everything come out wonderful and great. Libertarians have a tendency to think that the market's always going to do something. So, for example, a libertarian view on the market with China is, okay, so we acknowledge that China is violating market principles, but China, 15, 20 years from now, because they inefficiently allocated capital, is going to pay that penalty. Never mind the millions of American workers have lost their jobs. Sometime in the distant future, China will pay the penalty for not, serving the market the right way, not handling things in the market way of doing things. And a conservative looks at it and says, hey, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but governments can do a lot of things to mitigate their actions. But in the meantime, millions of my fellow Americans are losing jobs. I care about that. Yeah, so
libertarians have a lot of sympathetic ideas, but they're not always very well thought through.
It's a very ideological system. I think it's a utopianistic system in many ways, every bit as utopianistic as communism. And they basically, for them, the market is a capital N market that always ends up, in the long run,
It's almost the opposite of communism on the other side of the spectrum.
In a kind of a way it is. And years ago, I had discussions with libertarians that actually forced me to reevaluate my own view of economics, which frankly had been very libertarian. And I realized that I had sort of placed the market almost to be an omnipotent, all-powerful thing, which as a Christian, I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe that's a little bit of an idol worship there.
Yeah, well, they tend to be pro-choice. Not all of them, but they tend to be pro-choice, and then they forget about the libertarianism toward the baby. They tend to be pro-gay marriage because they don't want the government interfering, but then they forget about the rights of the Christians. So they don't always supply their libertarianism on a broader spectrum.
There's about a third of libertarians are pro-life. Polling shows that. And then there's other issues there. But libertarians, as through the writings of Ayn Rand, have a radical individualism. That is not a conservative viewpoint. Radical individualism is it's literally selfishness is good. Literally, libertarians believe that selfishness is good. That's fine.
And what's the difference between Ayn Rand's, is it called obstructionism? What was her, I'm using the wrong word. She had a philosophy that was something even beyond libertarianism.
Well, it actually was libertarian philosophy. There's various forms of, I think it was... I'm
thinking of the word constructionism, but that's not correct. That's the word used for a judicial...
She was a libertarian, but there's various branches of libertarianism.
Yeah, okay.
So a conservative might believe in rugged individualism, but not radical individualism, because a conservative is concerned about the community. A conservative looks at a public policy, says, okay, sure, the public policy of legalizing drugs won't personally affect me. I'm a disciplined person. I have a solid core and foundation in place. I'm not going to go off and abuse drugs. But I know that there's people who are struggling, people out of work, people with broken families, that making drugs more available is going to damage them. So I will take away my right to imbibe drugs when I want to and say, for the good of society, I'm willing to step back and say, yeah, this is probably not good. We have to be moderate. We've already got, alcohol. We've already got tobacco. And we see the damage that causes. That's sort of but society has culturally accepted that. And frankly, you can have a glass of wine without damaging yourself on a nightly basis. I can't say that much for cigarettes, but I can't. It's hard for me to defend cigarettes, but so there's a difference. And we've had this libertarian view of economics has corrupted the Republican Party and conservatism. I think genuine conservatism believes in the market, but it believes in a market with a small m. It doesn't believe, conservatives don't believe the market is...
Market's not a god.
It's not a god.
Yeah.
And that the market can at times be thwarted. People can gain enough control to influence the market. A whole country like China can, absolutely distort the market or destroy market forces such that the market's not operating. And waiting 20 or 30 years down the road for China to maybe pay the price for violating market tenets, that's not a conservative perspective.
All right, Mike, hold with us. We'll be back for one more segment. You're listening to The Bob Siegel Show. Objectivist is the word I was looking for Ayn Rand. I think I did say that word at first, and then I threw in the word constructionist, which is something totally different. But anyway, that would just be another form of libertarianism, as you're saying, Mike.
It is a form of libertarianism. And when Ayn Rand died, she had a $ sign of flowers on her coffin to show where she was coming from. That's what she had. It's a pretty sad commentary on somebody's life. That's what they want on their coffin.
On a couple of other issues, I'd like to get your opinion of the IG report. That's huge in the news since the last time you were on our show.
The IG report, still has some FBI names redacted in it, FBI agent names redacted, but the body of the report, which I've scanned through, basically contradicts a lot of what's in the executive summary. So you have a very long executive summary that basically says, well, in the Hillary Clinton investigation, they made this decision, and it was just a judgment call, and it was an understandable judgment call, but they kept making these understandable judgment calls 100% in favor of Hillary Clinton every single time.
Now you're saying that Horowitz wrote the report, but you're saying Horowitz himself did not write the summary.
I don't know who wrote the executive summary. All I can say is the executive summary does not. There's tons of bias showed in the body of the report, yet the executive summary won't conclude that there's bias.
But how come when Horowitz was grilled, he didn't come out and say, hey, look, I didn't write that summary? Would that just violate their protocol?
First of all, the report is 500 pages, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think he didn't really write the report. He had staff members write the report. He oversaw the writing of the report. I don't know who wrote it, but all I can say is that there was pressure put on to sort of straddle the line on the summary. The summary basically accurately tells you the issues that many of us see as major problems that show that a real investigation was not done, but it gives an out saying, well, these are judgment calls that any given time somebody can make a judgment call. Yeah, we're not going to take her testimony under oath. That's a judgment call. And it does that. So it basically, but at the same time, it does acknowledge that there were issues.
It reminded me a lot of Comey's report about Hillary, in that he gave this indictment and then said, however, we don't see enough evidence of conviction. It was something very similar. He gives this humongous case that there was bias against Trump, but then they wrap it up by saying, however, this bias had nothing to do with the final decision.
They say they can't prove, but they say they can't prove the bias. And so they're going, they're saying
no documentary.
Well, they in other words, you have all the actions that show bias. You have people savaging Donald Trump, very clearly in charge of the thing, but they don't actually say, well, we can't find somebody who says, yes, now we've taken our bias and we're going to take our bias and we're going to change the procedures.
As if the FBI would have written a report saying we've decided to be biased. Of course they're not going to find but this would have been enough to take to a jury. This would have been evidence beyond a reasonable doubt.
Way beyond a reasonable doubt.
Person.
So the thing is that the report did put a lot, but unfortunately, once again, what it did is you now have this executive summary that the left stream or mainstream media, whatever you want to call them, can now cherry pick out phrases from it and tell their audience, see, the Inspector General said there wasn't bias, or the Inspector General did this. And then, of course, if you want to...
There was really something for everybody in that report.
Right, and then if you want to, you go into the body report and show multiple examples of it, except that the mainstream press is not going to do that.
No, they're just going to go when they're even talking about it at all.
So now you're down to like he said, she said type thing for the average person that doesn't follow this closely. And a lot of people do not follow this closely. Right. So until we actually start to see prosecutions and people going to jail, a lot of the American public is going to say, oh, this is just political blather going back and forth. The Democrats say this, the Republicans say this. And the reason we haven't seen people going to jail or people being prosecuted is because of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And he is I believe that there is no one single person that has done damage to the presidency of Donald Trump than Attorney General Sessions.
It is so sad because he was like Trump's first friend in the campaign.
Yeah, I don't know.
He was the first Republican to really stick out his neck.
I do not know what's going on with him, but somebody
probably has his family held hostage somewhere. That's the way it looks. It's like he's been compromised.
His behavior would fit the idea that they have something on him.
Yeah.
No evidence of, I have no concrete evidence of, but all I can say is his behavior pattern fits that.
Well, if that's not the explanation, I'd love to know what the explanation is.
I would love to know it too.
Because it is unusual behavior.
So the Inspector General's report is still very important, and it has...
And there'll be more to come because they're going to move on now to the Russia investigation.
Right, which would take 2 years for that to come out. So we already have enough evidence about the Russia investigation. We don't need the Inspector General to go on for another 2-year report. What we need is...
But it is going to drag... It's going to drag on throughout Trump's whole presidency.
I do believe there's a possibility that it will not, because one of the things that's interesting is I look at sort of a weather vane of which way the political winds are blowing Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, he's been much more defensive of Trump lately.
No, and I believe that the Senator Lindsey Graham's, I believe that he is shrewd and that he understands the winds in D.C. So he is now basically hopping on the bandwagon. You know, he was vehemently defending Mueller, defending the investigation, and now he's switched. He's changed his tune. So I think that the
and
political
you think
winds
Graham
have changed.
goes more with the wind than genuine convictions?
Yes, I do.
Sometimes I thought he sounded like he's had genuine convictions. I just haven't agreed with his convictions on things.
Well, you know what? That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know what's in his heart. I believe that he does go where he believes the political winds are blowing, and or maybe finally that so much evidence has come out that it's overwhelmed his dislike of Trump to say, oh, even though I despise the guy.
Can't the House and Senate just shut it down?
Of course, if the only reason the Mueller investigation's been allowed to continue is because of Republican support. It's because there were Republicans in our party, both in the House and the Senate, hoping that Mueller would take down Trump.
They're going to worry about how the media will portray them if they shut it down.
But they also literally would love to see Trump go down because Trump is so upsets the status quo, for example, on trade. There is a lot of people, there's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of people in this country making hundreds of billions of dollars off the trade status quo. It's not good for the country as a whole, but there is an elite group of people that are making hundreds of billions of dollars. There's the China lobby that sends lots of money toward the senators and the congressmen to be reelected for when they get out of office. There's that support structure of pro-China, pro-status quo people they can rely upon to make tons of money when they get out. So these people are for the status quo. They see a Trump as a threat to it. And however, Trump now has consolidated so much of the support of the Republican Party that people that in the past would have stood up to Trump are now uncomfortable about doing so. They're afraid to do so. So yeah, sure, Corker will still stand up to Trump. He's on his way out. Flake will still stand up to Trump, and even Ryan. But the average Republican elected official is now thinking twice about going after the president.
Quickly, any prediction for the midterms? Will the Republicans hold the House and Senate?
Right now, I believe they're going to hold the House. And they will pick up seats in the Senate. And they'll pick up seats in the Senate.
So they'll hold both. Okay. All right. Thanks, Mike. It's always great having you. We'll see you next week, everybody.